must take my exam. Oh, where's my books? Where's my classroom? Where's my clothes? Oh, 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 hello. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not a very big fan of nightmares. Well, they're scary and upsetting, and, well, they can just ruin a perfectly good night's sleep. But there is one kind of nightmare that I do enjoy, and that's the kind you know is a nightmare. Have you ever had a dream that you know is a dream while you're dreaming it? They're wonderful because suddenly you're in control and you can make anything happen. Last year, I had a nightmare in which I was being chased across a playground by a giant green rat with big white fangs. Oh, he was 10 feet tall, and he swiped at me with long, sharp claws. But then all of a sudden, it occurred to me that this wasn't real. So I stopped running, smiled, and turned myself into a giant cat, 50 feet tall. The big green rat looked terrified, and he turned and he ran away, and I started chasing him. Oh, my goodness, it was so much fun. But just then, however, another thought occurred to me. What if the green rat was the one who was dreaming and I was in the rat's dream? Well, I never should have thought that, because as soon as I did, the rat stopped running, smiled, and turned himself into a gigantic green dog 100 feet tall. And the dog started chasing me until I jumped off a cliff and fell through the air, and I landed on a beach where George Clooney asked me if I could rub suntan lotion on his back. And, well, I don't know what happened to the big green dog, but I do know that I made darn sure George Clooney would not get a sunburn. Now, this is a poem about bad dreams. It's called simply Nightmare by W.S. Gilbert. When you're lying awake with a dismal headache and repose is tabooed by anxiety, I conceive you may use any language you choose to indulge in without impropriety. For your brain is on fire and the bedclothes conspire of usual slumber to plunder you. First your counterpane goes and undercovers your toes, and your sheet slips demurely from under you. Then the blanketing tickles, and you feel like mixed pickles, so terribly sharp is the pricking, and you're hot and you're cross, and you tumble and toss till there's nothing twixt you and the ticking. Then the bedclothes all creep to the ground in a heap, and you pick 'em all up in a tangle. Next your pillow resigns and politely declines to remain at its usual angle. Well, you get some repose in the form of a doze with hot eyeballs and head ever aching, but your slumbering teems with such horrible dreams that you'd very much rather be waking. For you dream you're crossing the channel and tossing about in a steamer from Harwich, which is something between a large bathing machine and a very small second-class carriage. And you're given a treat, penny ice and cold meat, to a party of friends and relations. Well, they're a ravenous horde, and they all come on board at Sloane Square and South Kensington stations. And bound on that journey, you find your attorney, who started that morning from Devon. He's a bit undersized, and you don't feel surprised when he tells you he's only 11. Well, you're driving like mad with this singular lad. By the by, the ship's now a four-wheeler, and you're playing round games, and he calls you bad names when you tell him that Ty pays the dealer. But this you can't stand, so you throw up your hand, and you find you're as cold as an icicle, and your shirt and your socks, the black silk with gold clocks, crossing Salisbury Plain on a bicycle. And he and the crew are on bicycles too, which they've somehow or other invested in, and he's telling the tars in all the particulars of a company he's interested in. It's a scheme of devices to get at low prices all goods from cough mixtures to cables, which tickled the sailors, by treating retailers as though they were all vegetables. You've got a good spadesman to plant a small tradesman, first take off his boots with a boot tree, and his legs will take root, and his fingers will shoot, and they'll blossom and bud like a fruit tree. From the greengrocer tree you get grapes and green pea, cauliflower, pineapple, and cranberries, while the pastry cook plant cherry brandy will grant, apple puffs and three-corners and banberries. The shares are a penny, and ever so many are taken by Rothschild and Baring. And just as a few are allotted to you, you awake with a shudder despairing. You're a regular wreck with a crick in your neck, and no wonder you snore, for your head's on the floor, and you've needles and pins from your soles to your shins, and your flesh is a creep, for your left leg's asleep, and you've cramp in your toes, and a fly on your nose, and some fluff in your lung, and a feverish tongue, and a thirst that's intense, and a general sense that you haven't been sleeping in clover. But the darkness is past, and it's daylight at last, and the night has long been gone. Ditto, ditto, my song, and thank goodness they're both of them over. The end. What a funny. Oh, hello. I was thinking of my friend Cindy, who once had a cat that was afraid of heights. His name was Gunther, and he couldn't climb trees or fences or even jump up on a chair without having a panic attack. All the other cats in town made fun of him, and he was ashamed of himself, and he had no friends. One day, Cindy hired a cat hypnotist to help Gunther get over his fear of heights. He was the best cat hypnotist in town, but unfortunately, he was also hard of hearing. He thought Gunther had a fear of nights, so he hypnotized him so that he would no longer fear nights, but would enjoy nights and desire nights for as long as he lived. Well, it wasn't long before Gunther started sleeping all day and going out all night. He went to nightclubs and wild parties, and he learned to tango. He became a regular at jazz clubs and began to play the saxophone. He wore sunglasses at night, recited poetry, and always had his arm around a beautiful girl cat. He even opened his own discotheque called Gunther's Litter Box, with dancing kitties, and Gunther was always there, the life of the party. Of course, he was still afraid of heights, but no one ever made fun of him anymore because, thanks to the hypnotist's bad hearing, Gunther had become the coolest cat in town. Well, this is another story about a very cool cat, and a very smart one, and it's called Puss in Boots by Charles Perrault. There was a miller whose only inheritance to his 3 sons was his mill, his donkey, and his cat. The division was soon made. They hired neither a clerk nor an attorney, for that would have cost too much money. The eldest took the mill, the second the donkey, and the youngest nothing but the cat. The poor young fellow was quite upset for having received so little. My brothers, said he, may make a handsome living by joining their shares together, but for my part, after I've eaten up my cat and made myself a muff from his fur, I shall then die of hunger. The cat, who had heard all this, but pretended otherwise, said to him with a grave and serious air, Do not be concerned, my good master. If you will but give me a bag and have a pair of boots made for me, that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, then you shall see that you're not so poorly off with me as you imagine. The cat's master did not take much stock in what he said. However, he had often seen him play a great many cunning tricks to catch rats and mice, such as hanging by his heels or hiding himself in the pantry and pretending to be dead. So he did take some hope that the cat might get some help for him in his miserable condition. After receiving what he had asked for, the cat gallantly pulled on the boots and slung the bag about his neck. Holding its drawstrings in his forepaws, he went to a place where there was a great abundance of rabbits. He put some bran and greens into his bag, then stretched himself out as if he were dead. He thus waited for some young rabbits to get acquainted, who were not knowing of the deceits of the world yet, to come and look into his bag. He had scarcely lain down before he had what he wanted. A rash and foolish young rabbit jumped into his bag, and the master cat immediately closed the strings, then took and killed him without pity. Proud of his prey, he took it many miles to the king's palace and asked to speak with his majesty. Surprised and impressed to see a cat in boots, the servants took him upstairs to the king's apartment. Making a low bow, the cat said to his majesty, "Sir, I have brought your rabbit from my noble lord, the master of Carabas," for that was the title which the cat was pleased to give his master. "Tell your master," said the king, "I thank him, and I am very pleased with his gift." Another time, the cat went and hid himself in a grain field. He again held his bag open, and when a brace of partridges ran into it, he drew the strings and caught them both. He presented those to the king, as he had done before with the rabbit. The king, in like manner, received the partridges with great pleasure and gave him a tip of 2 silver coins. And so the cat continued, from time to time for several months, to take game to his majesty that he said was from his master. One day, when he knew for certain that the king would be taking a drive along the riverside with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, "If you will follow my advice, your fortune is made. All you must do is to go and bathe yourself in the river at the place I show you. Then you leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas did what the cat advised him to, without knowing why. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and the cat began to cry out, "Help! Help! My lord Marquis of Carabas is going to be drowned!" At this noise, the king put his head out of the coach window, and finding it was the cat in the boots who had so often brought him such good game, he commanded his guards to run immediately to the assistance of his lordship, the Marquis of Carabas. When they were drawing the poor Marquis out of the river, the cat came up to the coach and told the king that while his master was bathing, some rogues had come by and stolen his clothes, even though he had cried out, "Thieves! Thieves!" several times as loud as he could. In truth, the cunning cat had hidden the clothes under a large stone. The king immediately commanded the officers of his wardrobe to run and fetch one of his best suits for the Lord Marquis of Carabas. The king received him very courteously, and because the king's fine clothes gave him a striking appearance, for he was very handsome and well proportioned, the king's daughter took a secret inclination to him. The Marquis of Carabas had only to cast 2 or 3 respectful and somewhat tender glances at her, and she fell head over heels in love with him. The king asked him to enter the coach and join them on their drive. The cat, quite overjoyed to see his project was succeeding, ran on ahead. Meeting some countrymen who were mowing a meadow, he said to them, "My good fellows, if you do not tell his majesty that the meadow you are mowing belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped up like mincemeat." And with that, he extended his claws and swiped them like a sword through the air. The king did not fail to ask the mowers whose meadow it was that they were mowing. "It belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas," they answered together, for the cat's threat had frightened them. "You see, sir," said the Marquis, growing wise to the cat's deception, "this is a meadow which never fails to yield a plentiful harvest every year." The master cat, still running on ahead, met with some reapers and said to them, "My good fellows, if you do not tell the king that all this grain belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped up like mincemeat." And then he swiped his claws at them as he had at the others. The king, who passed by a moment later, asked them whose grain it was that they were reaping. "It belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas," replied the reapers, which pleased both the king and the Marquis. The king congratulated him for his fine harvest, and the master cat continued to run ahead and said the same words to all he met. The king was astonished at the vast estates of the Lord Marquis of Carabas. The master cat came at last to a stately castle, the lord of which was an ogre, the richest that had ever been known. All the other lands which the king had just passed to belonged to this castle. The cat, who had taken care to learn who this ogre was and what he could do, asked to speak with him, saying he could not pass so near his castle without having the honor of paying his respects to him. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do, and invited him to sit down. "I have heard," said the cat, that you are able to change yourself into any kind of creature that you have a mind to. You can, for example, transform yourself into a lion, an elephant, or the like." "This is true," answered the ogre very briskly, "and to convince you, I shall now become a lion." The cat was so terrified of the sight of a great lion so near him that he leaped onto the roof, which caused him even more difficulty because the boots were of no use at all to him walking on the slippery tiles. However, the ogre resumed his natural form, and the cat came down, saying that he had been very frightened indeed. "I have further been told," said the cat, "that you can also transform yourself into the smallest animals, for example, a rat or a mouse. But I scarcely believe that. I must admit to think that I think that would just be quite impossible." "Impossible?" cried the ogre. "You shall see." He immediately changed himself into a mouse and began to run about the floor. And as soon as the cat saw this, he fell upon him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king, who saw this fine castle of the ogres as he passed, decided to go inside. The cat, who heard the noise of His Majesty's coach running over the drawbridge, ran out and said to the king, "Your Majesty, welcome to the castle of my Lord Marquis of Carabas." "What? My Lord Marquis?" cried the king. "And does this castle also belong to you? Well, there can be nothing finer than this court, and all the stately buildings which surround it. Let us go inside, if you don't mind." The Marquis gave his hand to the princess and followed the king, who went first, which was fortunate because the Marquis had never before stepped foot in the castle and knew not its design. They passed into a spacious hall where they found a magnificent feast, which the ogre had prepared for his friends, who were coming to visit him that very day, but dared not to enter because, seeing the king was there. His Majesty was perfectly charmed with the good qualities of the Lord Marquis of Carabas, as was his daughter, who had fallen passionately in love with him. Seeing the vast estate and all the Marquis possessed, the king said to him, after having drunk 5 or 6 glasses of wine, "It will be your own fault, my Lord Marquis, if you do not become my son-in-law." The Marquis, making several low bows, accepted the honor which His Majesty conferred upon him, and forthwith, the very same day, married the princess. The cat in the boots became a great lord and never again ran after mice, except for his own entertainment. The end.